Here in the Northern Rockies, dark winter months are outlasted in basements, dens, and nooks where kindred souls gather together to share intel, swap fly patterns, and relive the memories from seasons past. This gathering spot, known locally as the February Room, is the inspiration for this podcast. No matter the season, the door is always open to those with a fly fishing story to tell. Brought to you by CD Fishing USA, the North American distributor for composite development fly rods and accessories. 40 years of Kiwi ingenuity and graphite technology now available at cd-fishing.us or your local CD USA dealer. Follow us on Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook. And remember to go fishing. Here's your host, the Carnops, and this is the February Room.
In my search for budget boats, I've met some unique and eclectic characters. There was the guy with the transom made from Bondo, and who could forget the fellow with the homemade composite wood aluminum boat? A quick test row revealed the flaws in his craftsmanship and design. The floor leaked like a sieve. Last summer, low water flows sent me on an emergency search for a raft and trailer. Not an easy item to locate these days, but I was referred to one Nick Halle who solved my dilemma. Turns out he works for Trout Unlimited and agreed to join us today. So without further ado, Nick Halle, welcome to the program.
Hey, Justin, thanks for having me.
Yeah, buddy, thanks for having you, and I apologize for the disappointment, but you drew the short end of the stick and you get to talk to me today.
Well, they can't all be first round picks.
That's right. I've never been a first round pick, man. Always the last one on the bench. Well, right on, man. We start things off here with a yarn. So you got a fishing story for us or an adventure?
Well, I don't have anything that's going to hold a candle to Jay Dixon's story of getting chased around by a llama in a lightning storm, but I guess it'd be appropriate. I don't come from a fishing family, but I come from a family of poor decision makers, which has led us to some pretty good stories. And I definitely kind of fell in love with rivers before I fell in love with fishing and fly fishing. So I would spend all my summers up in Maine, in northwestern Maine, up in the mountains. And over the years, we unfortunately got to have some familiarity with the local ranger for just, frankly, not on him, on us, for just doing stupid stuff all the time, and getting in trouble and needing a little help. So most recently, I must have been in 7th or 8th grade. There's a piece of water, the Dead River in Maine is it's a whitewater destination. They do whitewater releases below Flagstaff Lake, but above the lake there are two branches, and the south branch of the Dead River is usually only runnable at high water, just because it's so for Maine it's a pretty high gradient stream. There's a lot of rocks, and we were heading up one summer, my family and I, and apparently it had been raining up there for about a week, and so my dad was very very keen on going and doing the South Branch, which he had done a few times at high water. He said, you need 3 or 4 days of good rain, not stupid rain, good rain. Well, we'd had a week, and some of our family friends up there, we would do a lot of stuff with, joined us, and the kind of the patriarch and the guy who ended up being, I suppose, my surrogate grandfather of sorts, after my grandfather passed, was a man named Julian Stein. And Julian was about, at the time, I think Julian was 89. And the guy had never met a bad decision he didn't like. So we show up to the put-in on this logging road, and the river is pretty much over the logging road bridge. Now, we are about to go down this river in not whitewater boats. We had a couple of canoes, a couple of, sit on top kayaks and, lake kayaks. And Julian and his granddaughter were in what I can only describe as like a old town canoe with a transom Not exactly a whitewater worthy craft. So we go down the river, and it's moving real good. And eventually, we get to the first drop, which is called Dead Reckoning, and I don't even recognize it. It does not look like anything I had ever been down before. And needless to say, every single boat in that river dumps. I got pinned under a rock and had to get out of my kayak, and got myself to the shore just in time to scoop up the octogenarian Mr. Stein as he is going down the river. So now we are on. Our parties are on two different sides of this river, which is so loud we cannot, we can't shout at each other over it. And Julian says, I think I have, banged up my leg. I'm 89 years old, if you hadn't noticed. I got to get out of here, man. And I'm like, no, dude, let's stay by the river, and, we'll sort this out. And he's like, well, you can stay, but I'm walking to the road. So I'm not gonna leave the guy, but we start walking in the vague direction of the highway, which we know is somewhere out there. Now, this is late July in Maine, and we are walking through one of these, impenetrable Maine swamps with, little conifers about the size of a hockey stick that are about 4 inches apart from each other. And the flies and the mosquitoes are so bad. By the end of in a few hours, my left eye swole shut. And Julian is going along. He's clutched to this paddle that he his canoe paddle that he's had for like 60 years, and refuses to let go of it. And what we thought might be about a 2-mile walk. Well, we were walking for about 8 hours. Well, I shouldn't say walking. We were, bushwhacking. At this point, Julian is he looks kind of like a blueberry. The guy is just completely black and blue. I eventually found some tree that was a little taller than the rest of them, scramble up it and find Mount Bigelow, which I knew was kind of roughly in the direction that we needed to be going. So I kind of, put us in that direction. And so about 8 to 10 hours after we left the bank of the river, we pop out on the highway where it seems like every cop car and park ranger in northern Maine was looking for us. And they eventually, at this point, I'm picking up his legs to move him. And we get up to the highway, and the guy collapses from dehydration. He thought he had a heart attack. So he gets in the ambulance, and he heads right to the hospital. I get in the car with my dad, who he somehow had salvaged one of the boats downstream and took like 8 people in that canoe through the rest of the river. And we're sitting there in the car, and Ranger Reggie Hammond pulls up, and he says, I want to have a word with you. And he gets my dad out and just hucks his clipboard at him, and just basically just starts screaming. I'm like, what are you thinking, dude? And who the hell is this Julian guy? He's done. No more Julian. At this point, I can't see.
Reggie lost it.
He had every cause. This is like the third time he'd rescued my dad, and Julian doing some stupid crap up there. He's totally in the right, and we were totally in the wrong. But at this point, my hand, I couldn't make a fist. My hands are all swollen up, and we went and did it 3 more times that summer. That's how much fun we had.
Ranger Reggie blew his top.
Yeah. I apologize. There's no llama chase in that story, but it's certainly one of the more memorable times I'd had on the river. I had my $50 eagle claw outfit in the kayak, because I was like, maybe I'll fish a little bit. That thing was gone, along with a couple of the canoes, but that's a memorable one for sure. And
that was in a rapid called Dead Reckoning on the Dead River.
Dead Reckoning, on the south branch of the Dead.
Wow. Yeah, that that reminds me. It sounds like we had similar upbringings. Um, and one of our river misadventures, we used to go down and float the wild and scenic section of the Rogue whenever we could pull a permit, you know. And I don't. How old were you during that story?
Oh, how much? Eighth grade, seventh grade. I was,
Yeah.
not an adult.
Yeah. Too young to know better. Um, and I was probably about the same age as you were, and we were in whitewater Tahiti, what we call Tahitis, you know, those little inflatable kayaks, and so we had the big raft, obviously, with all the gear and everything on it that my dad was running, and um, the kids would take turns in Tahitis, and my sister and I were going down what's called Grave Creek Falls on the wild and scenic section of the Rogue, you know, another aptly named rapid like Dead Reckoning.
Yeah.
And we flipped, and I remember just being, you know, like in a washing machine, right? I'm just getting somersaulted underneath the water, and I am scrambling around trying to grab onto something, and I latch onto something, and it turns out it's my sister's life vest, and she is pinned around a rock, and we both popped free and managed to survive the event. So that was an extremely close call. And then my mother on the same trip went for a prolonged swim in what's called the picket fence, which is a really dangerous section of whitewater on that river as well. But, you know, my dad would dive into those things without a lot of research, and, you know, just more hubris than anything. It'll all work out. And it
Yeah.
did.
Yeah. My dad's risk management policy, I would summarize as, should be fine.
Yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
man. Well, it's made me a much more careful boater. I'll tell you that. Surviving
Yeah,
my childhood.
yeah, I would say I probably err a little bit more on the side of caution than we did up in my youth in Maine. We had another another kind of I wouldn't say ill-fated adventure, but I hope the statute of limitations on this is pretty much gone, but we may or may not have trespassed onto a United States naval base to try to find some waterfall up in Maine, which we never found. Um, and I have I have a great picture of my dad and Julian standing next to the sign that says, property of United States Navy, like do not continue down this road. It didn't say like trespassers will be shot on sight or anything really exciting like that, but they're just both like standing there, just big smiles, two thumbs up, just here's
Really?
what we're doing. Oh yeah,
Nice.
that may
Nice.
or may not have happened.
Right. Yeah. It's you know,
Yeah,
it's hard to recall all the details, and yeah,
yeah,
sure.
yeah.
Sure.
Without my attorney here, yeah.
Foggy. Yeah, right. Well, cool. Well, you're the let me get your title right. You're the outreach coordinator for TU National, is that correct?
So, so I am our national volunteer operations coordinator. Mr. Pfeiffer is the outreach coordinator for Montana TU. It might be mixing up the titles, but I do a lot of work with our grassroots programs, kind of steering them on policy and process, and making sure that Trout Unlimited has 420 something volunteer led local chapters that. To use the party line, bring TU's conservation mission to life in their own communities. And, there's a lot of really kind of high level work that we do at the staff level, but there's many, local resources and waterways that simply just don't have the cachet or salience to get that kind of federal money or attention. So our grassroots chapters do a lot of incredible work and at the local level to make sure that these bodies of water that, well, they might not be important from a landscape level focus on conservation. They're really important to the people in those communities. They focus a lot on youth education and kind of making sure that there's a voice for trout, salmon, and clean water, clean cold water, and healthy habitat in their own communities. So I work with our chapters and try to make sure that they can operate to the best of their abilities as kind of independent conservation organizations.
Very cool. And how long have you been in that role, Nick?
Ooh, I think at this point it's probably 5 years. Um,
Okay.
5 years I've been doing that job for TU. I might be cutting you off here, but I spent in college. I spent my I spent my summers working out in Wyoming, um, doing kind of outdoor education for a company called Teton Science Schools, which we kind of the program we called Diet Knowles or Knowles Light. We take kids into the backcountry and you know basically just try to teach them how to not die immediately,
Right.
and talk about greater Yellowstone ecosystem ecology and stuff like that. Um, and after college, I graduated and I took off my graduation gown and I got right in my truck and headed to Craig, Montana, to go work in a fly shop to start my career as a fly fishing guide. Well, it wasn't too long before I kind of figured that I didn't really want to be a full time guide, and I was trying to kind of find my next step. My my education background is in nuclear weapons policy and strategy. So I
Whoa.
don't really have a clear, didn't really have a clear line to conservation, but I, I did what I could, and I found a job with Trout Unlimited in Washington D.C. On the internet, basically in the mailroom, and
Wow.
I took that job, mailing people calendars and stickers, and just thought, maybe I could get my foot in the door and wait for something better to open up, and luckily I was able to do that, and had got the job of a volunteer ops coordinator, and then a couple years went by in DC, and I called my boss one day and I said, I don't work for this company because I love concrete. So I'm going to move back to Montana. Whether or not I'm employed with you guys is that ball's in your court. Unfortunately, um, I guess I guess I had done enough to to convince them that they wanted to keep me around. So I moved out here to Missoula just a few years ago, and this is home now.
Wow. Right on, man. So you did your studies in what was it again? Nuclear what?
That's it's a my degree is in international relations and history, but my thesis, the college I went to, the College of Western Ohio, we have a really involved undergraduate thesis program. And I wrote my thesis. I wrote it for 2 years. I think it ended up being about 180 pages, on the invalidation of brinksmanship as an instrument of foreign policy during the Cold War.
Ooh. Ooh. Okay.
Yeah,
Well, I
it's
mean, yeah, I'd like to dive into that sometime if you got a copy laying around. It sounds like your background should open some doors for you, though. Should you stumble onto some naval base or something?
I think they would probably. I think they'd probably be pretty upset, regardless of my. Hey guys, I know I'm not supposed to be here, but if you read my thesis, it's
Could
very
you take a
interesting.
minute to read this? Just tell
Yeah,
me
yeah.
what you
Could you
think.
take all 180 pages?
I came
Yeah.
here for just some expert opinions. Well, cool, man. That's a interesting background, and good on you for scoring what most of us, refer to as a dream job. And I understand that has a lot of implications with it, and all jobs have their ups and downs. But working for TU National in Montana is a gig that a lot of my friends have aspired to and not been able to lock down, myself included. So good on you.
Yeah, it's I have a lot of friends that work jobs that they like. I don't have many friends that actually I shouldn't say that at this point. But I know that not everybody gets to work in a job or for an organization that um, in their heart of hearts they deeply believe in and deeply connect with the mission. So I'm I'm very privileged to go to work every day and know that the work that I'm doing is in the interest of protecting and um, conserving a resource that is just really hard. It's really hard to put into words how much wild rivers and fish mean to me. So it's definitely not something I take for granted, and I feel lucky every day.
Well, awesome, man. That's yeah. If you can hang your hat on that, you're doing all right. As an angler, as a obviously your job is somewhat centered around cold water fisheries and habitats. But as an angler, I know you like to kind of fish for everything, including bass and pike and those types of species that are somewhat maligned in places here in western Montana. And I'm curious as to the court of public opinion on, pike in trout rivers. The pike have been in these rivers longer than I've been here, and to me, they seem to rather coexist. What are your thoughts on the competition between, pike and trout? And keeping in mind that pike don't really compete with, say, west slopes and bull trout much because they're in different habitats. And, what we're talking about here is like introduced brown and rainbow trout versus introduced pike. And that's the nuts and bolts of it. And I feel like they have come to rather coexist. But what are your thoughts?
So, and I'll say this as as me, not as I don't want to speak for the company as we've as we've established. I don't have a fisheries biology background, um, but the first thing that I want to say is, and you'll hear some people say, "Well, pike are native to Montana," and that is true to a but with a very large asterisk. Um, the only place in Montana that pike are native is up in Glacier. We call it the crown of the continent because there is um, around Glacier National Park. There are three major watersheds. There's the West Slope, which goes to the Pacific Ocean. The East Slope goes to the Missouri, or the
Yeah.
Missouri then Mississippi drainage heads to the Gulf, and then there's a very tiny corner on the northeastern side of the park that goes to the Hudson Bay drainage, and I believe it's the Saskatchewan River, and that is the only little sliver of Montana that pike are actually native to. So if anyone tells you that they are native when they're talking about the Bitterroot, Clark Fork, Flathead, that's just not true.
Right.
Um, and they have been here a while. They were illegally introduced. I believe they were introduced in the Salmon Sealy area, and they were also introduced in a lake near Lolo, I believe. This is many years ago, but now they are all over the place in those lakes in the Clearwater. They are all over the Clark Fork. They're all over the Bitterroot. And one of the and we don't know a whole lot about um, their interactions with trout. Here's what we do know. We do know that our rivers right now are, for trout populations, they're well below carrying capacity, which in other words, the habitat could support more fish than there are. Um, Pike numbers are pretty significant, especially in places like the Lower Bitterroot and Clark Fork. Um, and right now, I know FWP is tagging pike to try to find, try to research a little bit more about their movements and their habits. So if you do catch a pike that has a pit tag in it, please report it to FWP. They're looking for those. But you know, it's interesting. It's interesting that you say, they don't, occupy the same niche. And to some extent, they don't. We find them in the sloughs and backwaters. We don't find them typically in the oxygenated water that trout really like. But there are studies that have shown that these fish do predate on trout a good bit. And one of the when they were doing research on Milltown Dam back before they removed it, one of the reasons that they wanted to remove that dam is because it actually became a pike factory. Um,
Right.
and there was a researcher named David Schmetterling, I think. He did a study where he found more juvenile bull trout in the stomachs of pike around Milltown Dam than there were in that reach of river, alive.
Right.
So there is some predation for sure. But in places like the Bitterroot, it's certainly maybe less of an overlap in terms of the habitat they occupy than in the you know Sealy Lake, Swan, in that neck of the woods. But we're trying to figure out just how much they predate on those fish, and it's unclear at this time, how much they are impacting our trout habitats. But in a changing climate and a perpetual drought that doesn't seem to be ending, and particularly in the Clark Fork, where there's also the mining legacy. Um, you know, Talking to some of my colleagues, a lot of them feel that the pike issue is kind of low on the totem pole in terms of the threats facing our trout populations. But um, they are a sport fish, but people generally don't come to people generally don't come to Montana to fish for pike. They come to fish for trout. So it's
Yeah.
definitely you know, an objective to kind of prioritize, even though they are, as non-native as the pike are, to prioritize the trout fishery over a pike fishery. But, you know, as opinions and climate changes, that could change too. I mean, I certainly love catching them, and they you know they're here to stay. They're not going anywhere. We are well past that point, in terms of the population and conservation objectives. They're here to stay. So
Right. Right. Yeah. And I was speaking specifically to competition between pike and the native species, west slopes and bull trout. Obviously, there's going to be interspecies predation at a what I would think would be a pretty high level, where browns and rainbows, browns particularly, share that same habitat, and obviously you see west slopes in the same stretches where you see pikes, especially on the Bitterroot. And but I guess and it's interesting. I like what you said there and how you explained um, the small area that they believe has native pike, and maybe that's a fact. I don't know. The regulations kind of keep it somewhat vague in their description of that. It says that pike may be native to that Saskatchewan River watershed.
well, yeah, they're definitely native to the watershed. Whether or not they
Gotcha.
actually lived in that, because that's the very top of that watershed. Whether or not they lived up there is, very questionable. It's certainly not, you know, a big slow river up there, but they are native to that drainage. So in theory, they could have swum up there. Um,
Gotcha. Cool.
yeah.
Yeah, that clarifies it. Yeah, so are the pike really in direct competition with like the browns and the rainbows that are introduced, or have they been together long enough that there's somewhat of a symbiotic relationship now? Like the big browns are eating the baby pike, for certain. That must be the case. Maybe they go into those sloughs when you see them digging through that that seagrass in there, maybe they're eating pike eggs. Who knows? It's an interesting, as you know, from an angling perspective and what I've seen here in the time that I've lived here. I just haven't seen like a decline in the regions, the sections of fisheries where the two species overlap. Like there's still plenty of big trout and there's plenty of big pike. And but to your point, maybe there'd be more big trout if there were fewer pike due to what you said about carrying capacity.
Well, yeah, and it's definitely an issue of biomass. Every watershed, every reach has a carrying capacity for, a good way to think of it is, pounds of fish, right? Um, Not necessarily numbers of fish, because a 24-inch brown trout needs quite a bit more food than a fry does, and it's different food. Um, what we do know is that the places that the pike like to hang out are also the places that juvenile trout typically take refuge. And we know that pike, will eat darn near anything that swims. But we don't know to what extent. And they do pike do off. They're a voracious predator. They're a higher trophic level than trout. Uh, but we don't, there's just so much that we don't know about them. And that's why this research is so important, to find out just kind of how much they overlap and interact, and how that pike population is affecting trout. Um, and I can't tell you anything about research. I can only tell you colloquial observations in this regard. But I have seen on the Bitterroot, you'll be going into a tail out and you'll see a big pike, and you will see kind of, you know, in its if it was a truck, it'd be right in its blind spot, behind and to the side. You'll see in a big brown, and there's
Yeah,
part of me that wonders how much are they kind of ha- at a
working
certain point.
together.
Yeah, at a certain point, brown trout in
Yeah,
particular become almost entirely piscivorous, or at the very least, uh, like, just like DiCaprio doesn't get up for a Lifetime made for TV movie. They don't really make a
much to
whole
my
lot of
wife's
movement.
chagrin. Much to my wife's
Yeah.
chagrin.
But he's only getting out of bed for the Scorsese and
Yeah,
the
right.
Tarantino flicks.
Yeah.
They're not really interested in small quarry. So just like pike are. And so I wonder to what extent, just seeing that behavior, and I've seen it a few times, if they are actually kind of, you know, using one another a little bit to to hunt. And I don't know. But it is an interesting thing that I've seen. And like I said, this is largely conjecture and colloquial observations, but the research is really important to kind of understand how those species interact. And it's also it's a very I'm a true optimist. As working in conservation, I think it's completely immaterial. I think you have to be optimistic and believe that humans are incredibly smart species, and if we've managed over the years to mess things up so bad, there's a chance that we can correct things. But as our climate continues to warm, we might be fishing for cool water species a lot more than we're fishing for cold water species. And frankly, as an angler, um, I love being able to go out in the dog days of summer and target pike, because they're super super fun fish to catch. And on a I'm sure you've done this, but on a really hot day in the middle of summer on the Bitterroot, you fish for trout in the morning and pike in the afternoon. And um, as things continue to change, it might be that we start fishing for those fish a little bit more. But there's just so much that we don't know, and it'll be really interesting to see what the research says. But like I said, with the pike numbers increasing and the trout numbers kind of on the decline, um, it definitely is not, the presence of pike is not augmenting the trout population.
Right.
That's something we can say with a little bit of confidence.
Right. Right. Yeah, that's interesting what you said about the pike and the big brown together and the tail outs. Is I've seen that too, and wondered the same exact thing. Like, all right, you kill it, I'll clean it up, or
Yeah.
but maybe big predators just are hanging out in the same spot because they don't, that's the place to be at that time, is the tail out, where they don't have to fight the current and they can pick off a fish that happens to amble out of the bucket or whatever. But yeah, interesting observation for sure. And then, like up in the Clearwater chain, which you mentioned, the old timers certainly will lament the pike, some of them. John McLean comes to mind, and he talks of the incredible West Slope fishing that used to be up in Sealy Lake. And I mean, I don't fish for them much up there, but I haven't caught a West Slope up there maybe ever that I can recall. There's certainly big browns and bull trout and a bunch of big species, big predators sharing that habitat now. But yeah, I definitely understand how somebody that grew up in an area that was amazing trout fishing could uh, blame the pike for the decline that we've seen in the last couple of decades.
Yeah, and Schmetterling's research definitely shows that they do predate on trout, and that's not a mystery. But we're in a time, we're in the Anthropocene, where you know uh, human impacts are changing everything in the natural world. Unfortunately. And there's a there's a sticker behind the bar in the Kettle House tap room that says, "The golden age of Missoula was always before you got here." But it's hard for me to think anything other than the good old days for some people are right now. But definitely things are changing, and we talk about it with the issue of hybridization of rainbows and cutthroat, and the cutbow trout. And while we do kind of lament the loss of those pure genetics, that might be what ultimately saves um, our trout fishery, and that's the natural selection for a fish that's a little bit more thermally tolerant. And that's just another reason why, in Montana, we haven't stocked our rivers since, the 70s, because of Dick Vincent's incredible groundbreaking research. If we focus on habitat and wild trout, and keep it wild, natural selection will run its course. And the most fit organisms are going to survive. So in that way, it's really important that we, you know, continue to protect our wild trout and wild fish heritage here, because it's a model that works, and the science is overwhelmingly clear on it. Now, that is something, the pike wrinkle is definitely not something that was included in Vincent's study for sure, but we're in a changing climate and a changing world, and the fish that are well equipped to survive are going to. So may the best fish win, but we're going to try to do everything we can in our power from a conservation standpoint to see that the native fish are they're still here for generations to come. And certainly in lieu of true natives, wild trout, because this is Montana. This is where people come to fish for trout, and they're spectacular fish. I like trout a whole lot.
Yeah. Yeah, wild trout fishing around here is pretty incredible for sure, man. There's not too many
And not to
places to
mention,
ride with.
it really important to our economy.
Yeah, for
You
sure.
know, if this
Definitely.
was not a wild trout destination, you know, there'd be a lot of folks like you know, like yourself and myself that probably, you know, maybe not out of a job, but certainly wouldn't be able to do what we do um, as often or as lucratively. That's probably not a word, but
Well, fair enough. Fair enough. Yeah, we wouldn't be having a podcast right now, probably, uh, without this community, and it's because it really is partly centered around wild trout fishing here. It's one of the best places to do it, and has more variety than any region I've seen in the lower 48. Agreed.
You know, in terms of, you know, diversity of fishery, I really, you know, I find it really hard to argue that there's a state in this country that has more diverse and high quality fishing opportunities than the state of Michigan. I think the the Great Lakes ecosystem is, when you talk about diversity of fisheries, I don't think anything can hold a candle to that. But in the Mountain West, for, you know, truly wild fish with a bunch of native fish, yes, absolutely. I don't think that there's anything like the west side of Montana.
All right, everybody got the message. Go to Michigan. Michigan's the spot. Well, right on, Nick. What is the timetable on this study that you reference that FWP is conducting? Do you know?
I do not. I know that they've started it. I believe in this last calendar year, started tagging pike. Um, I don't know how long they are doing that study for. Like, you know, like I said, I'm our national vol ops coordinator. My work here in Montana is actually fairly fairly insignificant because we have such an incredible state council with staff like, you know, Dr. Brooks and Bill Pfeiffer and the Kelly Willett and all those folks that work here locally. So my
Hackathorn,
national, exactly, yeah, Hackathorn.
Hackathorn, Rob
Rob
Roberts, right?
Roberts,
Yeah,
Paul Parson. I mean, there's
there's
in
a
Tess
good list of
Scanlon,
them.
there's a ton of incredible staffers that do work locally here. And frankly, you know, with 420 organizations across the country, I'm maybe not as focused on Montana as I would like to be. But the FWP study just started, you know, very recently. I don't know what the timetable is, but certainly I don't believe it's going to be short. We're going to need to know not only how these fish behave and move, you know, in the summer, but we also want to know where they're going in the winter. Um, Partially because we do know that bull trout are extremely migratory, and um, bull trout are, for those who don't know, they are a federally listed species protected by the Endangered Species Act. Um, they are they're not very hardy, and they're very, very particular about their habitat, and they need really cold, clean water. They need really complex habitat. They need really large watersheds that are connected to complete their life cycle. And we do know that, you know, those fish that maybe up in the North Fork of the Blackfoot, or up in the Clearwater, a lot of them come all the way down to the lower Bitterroot to spend their winters. Um, and while there might not be a whole lot of pike up in the North Fork of the Blackfoot, there certainly are a ton in the lower Bitterroot and Clark Fork. So there's definitely an overlap in those winter months that they spend down there. So we're going to need to
Interesting.
know a lot about their movements, not just in the, you know, the high season, if you will, of fishing, but year round. So I imagine that study will be going on for some time, but I couldn't tell you off the top of my head what the schedule is on that.
Interesting. Well, now you've given me the notion that I need to go try to hunt down a tagged pike. That'd be fun.
Yeah, I'm certainly looking for one. Yeah.
Well, awesome, Nick. Well, what's the best way for folks to reach you and learn more about your work and TU in general?
Well, if you want to reach out to me directly, you can shoot me an email. My email address is pretty easy. It's nick.halle. That's Halle, like Halle Berry. Nick.halle.
Yes, a lot like Halle.
Just like Halle Berry. nick.halle@tu.org. And feel free to drop me a line. And if you're interested in getting involved with your local chapter or learning more about TU, if it's a question I can answer, I'll do it. If it's a question I can't answer, I probably know who can. And I'm more than happy to connect anybody with somebody to
right on.
answer any concerns or questions you have.
Go to thefebruaryroom.com where you can access a complete library of our podcast and read more about our guests, their fishing stories, and favorite fly patterns. We're always looking for exceptional fly fishing yarns, and if you have one to spin, shoot us an email at info@thefebruaryroom.com. The February Room is always free, but if you feel like throwing a nickel in the pond, we appreciate any additional listener support. For companies and individuals interested in sponsorship opportunities, please contact us for our media kit. Thanks for stopping by the February Room, and we'll see you down here next week.